In this video, I'll show you how I kitbashed my own Shrine Anchorite for Trench Crusade. You probably already know about the independent miniatures game, Trench Crusade, which has surged into the wargaming community's consciousness since it raised over $3 million on Kickstarter in November 2024, and nearly double that amount since then. I was drawn to the game through its fantastic artwork and lore. The gritty alternate timeline setting of World War I, infused with Abrahamic religion, captures a perfect mix of history, mythology, and fantasy. In much the same way as Warhammer and 40k draw from human history and myth, Trench Crusade's setting resonates thanks to its unique spin on familiar tropes. And Trench Crusade is miniature agnostic, meaning you can use any miniatures you want, even if you are playing in official events. They only want you to buy their models if you think they are cool and you want to own them. And to be clear, the miniatures that they have made are incredible, and I definitely will be getting a hold of some eventually. For now, I love kitbashes and kitbashing, so the first thing I did was use my extensive bits box to convert an entire Heretic Legion warband. I used bits from across several Games Workshop games, including Warhammer, Warcry, Age of Sigmar, Necromunda, and 40k, to make these guys. To make my Warwolf, I really didn't have anything that was the right size, so I had to scratch build most of the body with wire, sculpting putty, and plastic card. With my Heretics complete, I wanted to start building some trench pilgrims for them to fight against. As the centerpiece of the warband, I wanted to start by making my own version of the Shrine Anchorite. This walking cathedral is just so cool. So, as I often do, I went straight to the lore for inspiration for my kitbash. Here are some of the lore excerpts that serve to inspire my conversion. From Book 1, The Holy Mother Church, Chapter 8, Shrine Anchorite. The interior of the Anchorite is covered in spikes and barbed hooks, so that the monk pilot is in a constant state of torment, rejoicing in their pain so they can suffer as their lord once did. The pilot monk or nun, once installed, never leaves the Shrine Anchorite until the day they die. Once they fall in battle, or rarely of old age, their remains are reverently removed and the body parts are preserved in reliquaries mounted upon the Anchorite. Thus, each of these war machines is a testament to its long history of war against the forces of hell. How cool is that? Rather than build something from scratch as I did with my Warwolf, I found a model that would work as a great basis for the conversion. This Conflict 47 model at my local hobby shop was 40% off, and I thought that the arms, legs, and body of this walking mech would make the perfect starting point for my Shrine Anchorite. I knew I wanted some sort of distinct church element that would make my own Shrine Anchorite unique, so I thought it might be cool if it featured a gigantic church bell. I imagined that with each step my shrine takes, its bell tolls, warding off the legions of hell. The constant ringing would further add to the psychological torment that its pilot is seeking. The original Warcry box game has a really nice bell that was a part of the plastic terrain included in the set. I used my hobby saw to remove it from the larger scenery piece. I quite like the structures that are supporting the bell, so I used my Dremel to trim the top of them to conform with the arch of the bricks. I assemble the legs and torso of the walker so that I have a base to work from. I dry fit the bell to see how it fits with the model. To add some additional church architecture, I have these pewter castle windows from an old Warhammer Siege blister pack. I add them to his thighs to bulk out his legs with a bit of extra armor. Next, I work on the shrine's breaking wheel, which is its primary weapon. I salvaged a pair of wheels from a knockoff Lego set, which are a pretty good size for this. I trim them and glue them together, just as the art depicts. Instead of having a trench pilgrim broken on the wheel, I instead opt to use this caged skeleton, again from the Warcry set. I imagine this is one of the former pilots of the Shrine Anchorite, permanently affixed to the shield as a reliquary. To further copy the design of the Catherine wheel, I use thin plastic card and plastic glue, wrapping metal brackets around the wheels between each set of spokes. If you've never heard of a Catherine wheel, it was a gruesome tool of execution used to mercilessly break the bones of its victims and then display their corpse publicly as warning. This sort of allusion to historical practices is something that Trench Crusade has in abundance, and I feel like I'm getting the coolest history lesson when I dig into this game. In order to make the kitbash easier to paint, I decide to cut the arm that will hold the shield into two parts. I glue the upper arm in place, then using a pin vise, I drill into each side of the arm so that I can pin the two pieces once painted. I create a handle for the wheel and attach the hand to it. A Black Magic Craft video that I watched about Trench Crusade recommended picking up these small Catholic charms on Amazon. I'll see if I can dig up his affiliate links which I used to purchase these, and I'll include them in the show notes below. I attach a couple of them to the legs to add some extra religious iconography to the build. While doing so, I noticed that there are some great charms that might be useful as details on the metal brackets. I attach them with superglue. Although this is a bit of a departure from the original design that has spikes on the wheels, I quite like how this looks. For the Anchorite's mace, I settle on this Bloodthirster hammer. While not a mace exactly, I like its hefty size and how baroque it looks. I pin the hammer to a plastic tube which will serve as the weapon's haft. I pin the left arm in the same way as before. Additionally, I find that I can drill through the fingers, which will allow me to put the weapon directly into its grip without cutting the weapon in half. For the front of the shrine, I add a couple more castle window bits to his sides. Then I use this Chaos Chariot bit with its icon sanded off. I also place this small panel with a skull on it to fill the gap at the top and provide something of a focal point or face to the shrine. With the weapons pinned in place, I review what I have so far and I decide that I don't like how tall these arches are on his shoulders. I know that if I remove these lower parts of the towers, there won't be enough room for the bell to swing back and forth. So I decide to reduce their height, but still maintain the clearance needed. To achieve this, I decide that I need some kind of larger shoulder pads, and after trying a few things, I settle on this well from the original Lord of the Rings box game. I cut the well in half and trim away the non-well elements at the edge. Then I clean up the edges, scraping away any loose plastic. This leaves me with two shoulder pads that also resemble some church architecture. As I was assembling my kitbash, I figured I should probably Google Anchorite so that I can actually understand what I'm building. I was a bit shocked to discover exactly what an Anchorite is. An Anchorite, or Anchoress, was a religious worshiper who voluntarily had themselves placed in an anchor hold, a permanent stone enclosure, basically like a prison cell, and then they remained there for the rest of their lives. Unable to leave, they were completely reliant on others to give them food and water and dispose of their refuse. Religious worshippers often revered anchorites as living saints. So yeah, another insane history lesson. I decide to further disassemble the bell structure so that I can customize it and have the bell on an angle. I drill holes in each arch and then in each end of the bell's wooden yoke. Then with some 1mm wire, I pin the components together. At this point, I feel like the shoulder pads aren't quite big enough, so I use some fast dry putty epoxy to add some additional girth to each well half. This stuff is a lot like green stuff or milliput, but it cures in about 15 minutes. Epoxy can irritate the skin, so I wash my hands immediately after I use it. Once cured, I cut and trim the putty to match the shape of the shoulder pads. I'm really happy with how this turns out, and the extra size of the shoulder pads provides a much more sturdy base for the bell tower, which makes the whole form more convincing. Off camera, I have glued some chains and a cloth to the front and back of the waist, and now I glue the shoulder pads in place, and then attach the arches to the shoulder pads. I leave the yoke unglued so that I don't have to immediately decide the angle for the bell. The bell tower in the Warcry set also includes skeletons that fit into these cavities in the arches. I further add to the reliquary theme by imagining that each skeleton on the shrine is also a former pilot, so that makes 5 former pilot reliquaries. The model looks very close to complete now, and I'm pretty happy with it. To fill some gaps here and there, I'll use some milliput. And now it's time to undercoat the model. I prep the pieces using bits of wire to hold the arms, and then I use a rattle can of gray primer. While doing so, I discover to my horror that this paint is quite old, and it's not being applied evenly as I spray it. Instead, it's creating a layer of gritty paint on my model, and while this is usually a disaster scenario, I did intend to paint this model in a grim, dark kind of style and use texture paint to achieve that, so I sort of lean into this as I'm spray painting it. When dry, I use a brush to remove as much of this crusted paint as I can. and what I'm left with has some pretty serious texture, maybe too much. I try not to worry about it, and I just start painting. I've never painted anything on this channel before, as I'm not a particularly gifted painter. Lately, I've just tried to paint things as fast as possible using as many shortcuts and time-saving techniques as I can. Often this will mean simple base coats and streaking grime enamel, and maybe a few other technical paints. My goal is to make this shrine look like a walking church ruin, and I take inspiration from the many cool ruins that I've seen when traveling Europe. I start with the brick elements, painting them with AK green-gray, which is honestly more like a bone color. I basically just slop this on as fast as I can on all the brick elements. I also use it to base coat the skeletons. I record the paints I am using in case I need to make reference to them if and when I decide to make a full warband of trench pilgrims. I've tried to be a lot more diligent with this sort of thing the older I get and the more infrequent my painting sessions become. It's been really valuable when returning to old projects after long breaks. The next base coat is Army Painter Gunmetal, which I apply to most of the metal components of the miniature. I follow this with Army Painter Oak Brown, which I paint over all the wooden elements, including the bell's yoke and the breaking wheel. I use Army Painter Weapon Bronze to paint the bell and other trim and details on the metal components, which helps break up the large amount of silver. For the bricks, I dry brush a bit of highlighting using some more of the base coat color. For the metal, I highlight a few spots with Army Painter Shining Silver, and then I apply a watered down coat of Games Workshop's black contrast paint. This helps to darken the metallics. And now the fun part. I apply AK's Winter Streaking Grime to the entire model. If you haven't used an enamel wash before, the technique is pretty cool. You cover the whole model liberally with the wash, and then after the model dries, use a cotton swab or makeup sponge and a bit of paint thinner or mineral spirits to remove the enamel paint from the raised surfaces. The result is a very muted, grimy, and grimdark aesthetic that looks pretty cool and doesn't really take a lot of effort. For the model's base, I go with something pretty simple, just a bunch of this ready-made medium density mud from Ammo. I again use some shining silver to highlight the metallics in certain places, even using it to highlight some of the bronze. Next, I return to the bricks. I'm really happy with the work of the streaking grime here, giving the bricks a weathered appearance, and now I'm going to use one of my favorite new products that I discovered in Adepticon in 2024, Dirty Down Technical Paints. I use the Dirty Down Moss on the bricks and some Dirty Down Verdigris on the bronze. These further add to the weathered appearance of the model, and the green is giving the miniature a much needed splash of color. All that's left is to add a few interesting base elements. Now my Shrine Anchorite is ready to peel its bell through the trenches of Europe, bringing the wrath of the church to the forces of hell. While there is plenty of room for improvements and highlights, this feels tabletop ready to me. Whenever I convert a miniature, I almost always feel like it's let down by my painting, but with this grimdark style, that disappointment is often mitigated, at least somewhat. I've been having a blast kitbashing miniatures for Trench Crusade, and I have a couple other cool Trench Crusade projects that I can't wait to share. So be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more Trench Crusade videos. This is Xander's Arcane Study. Thanks for watching.